Good evening, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well and safe. Your near and dear ones are doing well too. And whichever part of the world you are in, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us today. We are really incredibly grateful to three wonderful alums for joining us today who will be sharing their experiences with us. When I became associate dean a few years ago, I just looked at our people, our students who become alums and were charting trailblazing careers, making a name for themselves, highlighting IMC, and really making a mark for themselves. I met Todd virtually a few months ago. Todd is an alum of the erstwhile MSA program, and Todd and I have been in touch. And it's amazing to see even alums from the MSA program wanting to give back to the program. And Todd, I just wanted to just really thank you for again coming back and engaging Medill and IMC. We also have two other wonderful alums of the IMC program, Melissa and Tariq, and they're going to share their experiences with you. So I hope you enjoyed this program. Neil, I'm going to hand this program over to you. I know you are in great hands. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Vijay. Good evening, good morning to everybody. Hope you're doing great. It's an absolute honor to be able to facilitate this panel. As Vijay mentioned, these are three extraordinarily talented and successful C-suite leaders. And with no further ado, I think we should get the group going. So if Melissa, Todd, and Tariq, you'd be able to unmute yourselves and show yourselves, that'd be fantastic. It may be helpful if each one of you would start with just a very brief introduction about yourselves beyond what Vijay already provided. So, Melissa, I'll kick it off to you. If you could just give us a little bit of background so the group has a chance to know you.
Hi, sure. Great to meet everyone and see you this evening. I am Melissa Grady. I am the CMO of Cadillac. I have spent my entire career in really data-driven marketing and the place where marketing, tech, and data and creativity meet. And that has brought me to becoming the CMO at Cadillac, which has been a ton of fun. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Great. And you're working right now with a former colleague of mine from the ANA, and she took my position at McDonald's, Deborah. So you got great leadership at in the company. So terrific stuff. Todd, let's go to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here. I am the elder statesman, I guess, of the group, having graduated from the last official year of the Master of Science in Advertising program. I have worked in a number of industries during my career, including advertising agencies and packaged goods, telecom, cable, as well as the restaurant industry. And the thing that I give Medill all the credit for, among others, is preparing me to be willing and desirous to learn and to transfer that learning even across industries.
Thank you. And by the way, I had to put myself on mute. I have a dog that's very eager to participate in this conversation. So, and Tariq, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. I guess your dog's being true to form for brand tonight, so appreciate it. You might hear mine a bit later too. Hi, I'm Tariq Hassan. I'm the CMO of Petco. Just so Todd feels a little bit better, I'm not sure I was that far behind you, Todd. I was the third class of IMC. Went on in my career to spend some time in the agency world as a strategic planner and early days of account planning, much to the chagrin of Don Schultz, who tried everything in his power to convince me not to go into the dying agency world. It seemed to work out okay. I then spent some time in technology with HP and then financial services before coming to join Petco almost 3 years ago to be part of the journey that we've been on that continue to pivot the company, become a health and wellness company, and a successful IPO in January. So thanks for being here. Great to have an opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you. So to all the attendees, please know that the way that we're going to structure the conversation, and it is a conversation, is I'm going to ask each one of them, a question. Each one of them will provide their perspectives on that. And then as you have questions, if you just go into the chat, or let Stacy know. We'll make sure that we get your questions because I think that they really want to engage with you. Although I believe that some of the questions that at least we have to kick this off are reflective of what might be on your minds as well. So even though the focus of this is about staying current and successful once you get to the C-suite, I think it's important to underscore what steps, what milestone experiences were so important that prepared each one of our panelists to succeed in the C-suite. So I'm going to start this time with Tariq. If you could just highlight a couple that you think really shaped your experience and ultimately your success.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of dimensions, I think, for me. One would have started in the agency world. I think the ability to work across a variety of categories early on in my career has definitely played into the success that I've had. Looking at, first of all, being highly customer centric. So starting all the way back to IMC and the focus around the customer, but also in the agency world and being an account planner and really focusing in on that, I think had a definite impact on me. I think the other part of it is I built my career around, maybe a slightly sadistic approach to it, but running to the fire, taking jobs and roles and problems that people didn't want to do and finding great joy in going after those. And then I think the last part I would say is continually recognizing, and I think this is something that was even as far back as we got into the data in IMC, recognizing that the role of marketing is actually about the outcome of the business and recognizing that what we're doing, even if we're doing great work around the customer, if it doesn't impact the business, then you're not going to be successful as a leader. And the ability to talk behind what you do as a marketing specialist and actually as a business partner to your other partners in the C-suite, I think has been critical.
That's great. Thank you. Melissa?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same things. I think taking a lot of different roles in a lot of different industries. I started in automotive, then I went into tech. I was at Motorola. Then I went into insurance, which a lot of people questioned my career path at that point, but it was a lot of fun and had a lot of data. And now back in automotive. But I think being in those different industries and understanding, I think there is a way of thinking that comes with IMC, and applying that thinking in all these different instances and seeing how that works. And the other thing, and I think it's something that definitely started when I was at Northwestern, is I really like to unpack things and understand how they work. And I really became passionate about statistics in Ed Maltus's class. And it taught my brain to understand both how math works and how technology works, and bringing those skills into different roles and really understanding things and driving and building things. I love to build teams. I love to build technology platforms. All of that really keeps setting me up for the next thing. And I think it's really interesting as you go through and work across different roles and industries that you learn there's just these certain skills that you keep applying. And it's attacking a problem and figuring out how to solve it.
Thanks. Todd, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I was fortunate enough, and hopefully a number of you on this webinar were fortunate enough to know Dr. Schultz. Dr. Schultz is a fellow Okie to myself, and so I always looked up to him in many ways. The best thing I learned maybe during my whole time at Medill was something he said, which is there's two types of marketers in this world. Those that love the thrill of spending money, and those that love the satisfaction of the achievement of making money. Here's the catch. Everyone will tell you, well, of course, I'm the person that wants to make money. But he said, look at the cover of Ad Age. Look at what somebody wants to speak about at a seminar. It's always about how I'm spending money. And having that orientation about knowing you got to prove yourself out was probably the biggest learning I had.
That's great. And of course, we all love the reference to Don Schultz. Let me start right back with you now, Todd. The biggest drivers of your career. I'd love to get a sense when you think back on the different categories, the different experiences that you've had. What do you believe propelled you into the success that you've had and really the career growth that you've enjoyed?
Three things. ROI orientation, for my last comment. The second is a desire to have as much useful data as I can get my hands on. And the third was being, again, in a position both within current roles, but across my career, embracing the diversity of learning different industries, because you can benefit, I believe, greatly as you move across industries. Even as most people tend to stay in the same one. I'm a little bit biased that I think there's great value in the learning you aggregate.
That's great. And specific to data, I'm just curious, how have you seen with the explosion of data? How have you seen your ability to manage that and essentially to make sure that data is working for you and not the other way around? Right.
Well, again, I'm going to give credit to Medill and to my excellent instructors and professors there, Dr. Block and Dr. Schultz. Even they were doing a little bit of a test pilot for IMC/direct marketing that last MSA formal year when I was there in '87. And they talked to us about, hey, there's this thing called data and databases. And today it's only used to send direct mail/catalogs and maybe the beginning of the shopper loyalty programs. But it's going to be used for so much more. And what they really hit home with, as far back as my class, just like Tariq was saying earlier, the customer-centric view, that the data you want isn't about how many rolls of toilet paper did I sell in this size at Walmart versus Jewel, but rather, who is my customer? What's their needs? What's their current value to me? How can I improve my profit per customer?
That's great. Okay. Tariq, what about you? You're on mute.
Looking back on my career, I think there was a couple of different things. I had the lucky circumstance, of which wasn't by design, to go global early and go abroad and work on international brands. And I would say that stayed with me through most of my career. I've worked across international businesses, and I think that both hones you as a customer-centric individual, creates curiosity, looking at cultures differently, looking at consumers in a different way. I think that's truly stayed with me, and that has definitely been something that then went on to propel my experiences and the opportunities I was able to garner there. I think the other thing I would say is, putting myself in positions to fail responsibly. And I've been fortunate enough to work for leaders that, allowed you to pursue things with that kind of vigor, because as now my teams get to hear me echo back to them, you just don't get to great without taking chances and without creating a safe environment to fail. And then I would say the last piece is what Todd is talking about, is how do you not only learn how to use the data, but I had a CEO that I worked for at HP who really taught me about the intimacy of data, which is don't look for the answers inside the data. The data is never going to stand up and tell you what to do. And there will always be human behaviors that are counter to data, and you need to understand what those are. And so he was a real right brain, left engineer. Just to give you an indication of the guy is, he's the guy who invented the laser printer. But he had an amazing way to look at, an hour's worth of data and say, nope, we're not going there, even though that's what the data tells me. And these are the reasons why. And he would unpack all these other aspects of consumer value, need, et cetera, and triangulate them in a different way. So I think it's helped me become a marketer who not only leverages data, to Todd's point, for value, but I'm not beholden to it to make the decisions for me.
That's great. And I'm just curious, any experiences that you've had that you referenced failure that you care to share with the group that helped you become a better marketer?
Yeah, I mean,
it must be just one, right? Just one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got Melissa here. I'll talk about one I had in my career early on in Cadillac. And it's a brand that if I say it, she'll probably even shudder still. I worked on the launch of the Cadillac Catera, which was a perfect example of a product that ignored the data, right? You're trying to revitalize a business, but you wanted to try to not lose that older end of your segment. So you create this smaller hip car, but then your dealers turn around and focus on the wrong customer into it. And there's a whole lot of effort that went into, trying to turn the division around. And that was an example of completely using the data and then ignoring it in product design and ignoring it in terms of the way we position the product as well.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that did not affect Cadillac for the long term. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened.
No, but I'll tell you real quick. I was early in my career. I was sitting in the room. Melissa got a kick out of this. I was sitting in the room when a senior sales leader said, "Cadillac will have an SUV over my dead body."
I love that.
Not surprised by that, but I love it.
Isn't that great?
So Melissa, what would you add about in your career, getting to where you are right now, the things that really you can look back and say that made a huge difference?
I'm going to take it down to traits. I think really there's two things. I think passion and openness. And that has really gotten me everywhere that I've been. And I think, Tariq, you were talking about it. I got into global really early. And that was honestly, it wasn't an intent of mine. It was because I was in my first role out of school was at Jaguar. I absolutely loved what I was doing. I had skills that people didn't understand at that point. And I was one of the very early like IMC classes, and it really like applying those things and then having this passion and just being open to whatever was going to come led me into almost everything I've done. My first global role, and now almost everything I've done has been global. Getting into different industries just because I was open to having a conversation. And in everything I do, I love the projects I work on. I won't say I love going to work every day, but most days I love going to work, and I love, just achieving the different goals that we have, not because of any reason of acclaim, but just because I love to see things be built. I love to see things come to life and to fruition. And that has really just following whatever, was, and I think what's really interesting, and I we'll probably get into some of this later, but what's really interesting is where the world is today is not where the world, like the skills that we learned in IMC, a lot of the thinking is the same, but the tools and the how and all of that has completely changed. So you've got to stay engaged. And I think, it comes out in a lot of what both Todd and Tariq have said. You have to stay engaged. You just keep doing new things. You focus on the customer, you focus on business results, and you take the skills you have, and it's going to lead you everywhere, really.
That's great. So Melissa, you've been in your current role for how long?
About a year and a half. I've been at Cadillac for almost 3 years, and in this role about a year and a half.
Okay. So it's safe to say that the dominant majority of your career has been career progression, right? You've been in roles that probably have averaged 2 to 3 years, if that, and now in a C-suite position with an enormous, well-known brand. So the question I have is, once you get to that role, I'm curious about the steps that you have taken to ensure not only are you successful in this role, but to prepare you for the next one, whatever that may be. So I think it'd be really interesting, and I'm going to ask everybody this question. I think it'd be interesting to hear what you did once you got to this role, now that it's yours.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One of the first things, and this comes back from something that someone told me, not about me, but about someone else early in my career. Someone was talking about another person who was struggling. She was very senior and she was struggling in a role. And this person said to me, she doesn't know what she doesn't know. And it hit me because none of us knows what we don't know, implicit in that statement. But it taught me something in that you can march blindly as a leader and try to drive things, or you can really make sure at the same time that you're listening, and that you understand. And I think a lot of times I actually ask people to almost argue with me, to give me the other point of view, to tell me why they think I'm wrong, because then I'm going to make sure that any blind spots that are happening, I think that's one of the big things for me in my role that I really try to do. So I think listening, and then just really trying to think about how do you inspire people and what's the vision you're setting. I think if you do those things right and you keep following your passion and doing what you're doing, it's going to lead you to be successful in the role you're in and into the next roles that you're in. So I think those are some of the things that I really focus on.
Yeah. And Melissa, is it fair to presume that as you get to the level that you are right now, that without you requesting, like assertively requesting, that people tell it to you straight, that you may not necessarily hear it straight from as many as you otherwise would want?
Yeah, and I can tell you actually the moment when I learned this and it made me a better leader, and it was a learning moment for myself. I was in a meeting, and afterwards, someone who worked for me, and I really appreciate that we were close to the time, but I really appreciated that he came to me and said this. He said, you know, everyone already knows that you're probably one of the smartest people. Like everyone knows you're one of the smartest people in the room. Like you don't have to prove it. And that's not always easy to hear, but it like really in that moment made me understand what I needed to do, which was to listen, and also to make sure that I was hearing other points of view. And so now I do actually go out of my way to, because you're right, you do tend to get a lot of people who just will nod or agree with you or do things because you said, and they think, you know, that was another moment for me. I think that was really interesting. Everyone has, you know, in organizations, you start to know who people's first names are. Oh, well, you know, you mentioned Deborah. Deborah said, or, you know, and I remember saying to someone who I was working with, like, oh, I can't wait till my name becomes like an action item. Well, Melissa said, and they said, well, I think probably it already is. So you probably need to be aware of that. And I think that's another really thing that you have to be aware of. At a certain point, you might be saying something and you're sort of pontificating on something or thinking out loud, and people will take that as direction or action. And so you have to be really careful, and you have to make sure that you're seeing everything and you understand everything. I think it's those are some of the tougher lessons and more important things that I've learned along the way.
I'm willing to bet that if you said you thought there was a possibility of you sneezing in October, that somebody would send you a pallet of Kleenex now. So but, that's for a different day. Anyway, Tariq, what about you?
I think the first thing I would say is it took me a bit to figure it out, but I think when I stopped thinking about my career as a progression, it actually unlocked a more appropriate way to think about it. And then when I moved from thinking about either my own expectations of a progression or other people's, which is the more dangerous thought of progression, and moved more to understanding my own purpose, and really reflecting on what that purpose is and aligning that a lot with the business I was going to work with, I think that became a bigger unlock for me, because it allows a much more authentic version of yourself. You find a much better satisfaction in what you're doing. And I think one of the biggest challenges when you're first starting your career is the convincing factor. We have amazing convincing voices in our head that convince us this is the right job, that convince us this is the direction we need to go. And I think when we start to learn and understand that there's actually a model you can create for yourself, and that's never really quite a project that's done. I'm actually in the midst of completing a course right now, in which I'm going back and revisiting my purpose. There's a really interesting Japanese model called Ikigai that looks at, what you're good at, what the world needs, what to make money on, and what you're passionate about, and how you get to the center of that. I think truly starting to understand those things help you guide your way, as well as help you learn from when you misstepped. I'll be very frank. The time I spent in the financial services business was an amazing experience. And like Melissa, there were a few folks that said, "What are you doing?" Great experience from a data perspective and the scale of data that I got to learn and play from. But from a purpose perspective and from an approach to marketing and an approach to adding to culture, an approach to purpose-driven businesses, a complete disconnect with who I knew I was becoming. And so that having, having that knowledge of yourself. And then the last piece I would say is, forming that personal board of directors. Do you think about the people that you surround you with who are going to be those truth tellers like Melissa's talking about? And I have that personal board of directors who are not afraid to pick up the phone and say, "What are you thinking?" Or "That was great, but you could have," and really being open to allowing that to help you guide your thinking. You will end up in places you didn't expect. I can tell you I did not set out to be in the pet industry, and it has been one of the most amazing journeys of my career. And you will also, the smarter and the earlier, because I was a little slow to learn it, you learn it, you'll avoid putting yourself in places you just don't want to be and aren't good for both your career and your personal soul, to be honest.
Yeah. So Tariq, I'm going to put you on the spot really fast. So you said that purpose was was sort of a liberating moment for you. So in very short order, in IMC fashion, how would you articulate your purpose?
Oh, my purpose, and I'm still refining it. I'm about 3 weeks away from final, but my purpose is about creating environments that allow people to create transformation that have impact both to the business and the community that they're in. I'm a transformational leader. I love it. And when I've gone into situations where you think you want transformation versus you understand what the elements of transformation are, it doesn't work. unless you give me the opportunity to help create that argument. And maybe I can convince them sometimes, and depending on how senior you are, that might be the case, but usually listen to your gut. And if that's not real, the likelihood is you're gonna run out of steam. And you're not being true to yourself, you're not being true to the organization, frankly.
That's great. Thank you. Todd, when you got to the CMO role, I'm just curious. So you've heard what Melissa and Tariq have already said. What are the things that you did? A couple of things that you had to put in place for yourself to make sure that you succeeded.
I truly try to embrace the idea that there's no straight line to the top, whatever the top means. I'm not talking about organizational structure. To Tariq's point, one of the things that I learned later in my career than I wished I had is really what my own purpose was and how important that was in the satisfaction of what I do every day, well beyond the paycheck and a title. The core of that straight line to the top was I really believe that you will do your job the best if you learn how to do someone else's job. So that could be someone in your team, of course, that has an area that you're now managing that you don't have a background in. But I also found it, especially at the C level, we hear about this every day. It is critical to build those horizontal relationships. And so the two counterparts of mine in every industry I've worked in that I have focused most on learning their job and thereby learning what marketing can do to better help the business and their team is the CIO and the CFO. I think it's pretty obvious why you would work with both of them. But again, what I found was the real success for me is when I was doing that attached to a purpose of why I wanted to learn about that industry. And unfortunately, I learned that a little bit later in my career than I wish I had.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. So the importance of building relationships, particularly at all stages of your career, but when you're at the top, to orchestrate like you just described, but you can't orchestrate. And orchestrate probably a disservice to what you were describing is to truly establish the partnership.
Yeah.
With other members of the team
Right.
on the leadership team level is huge.
And to everybody else's point, by the way, about the board of directors, absolutely have a personal board of directors. I also looked at these relationships internally as my business board, my CMO board of directors, because as the old saying goes, everybody's got an opinion, a strong opinion about marketing, even marketers. And I would much rather hear that opinion from that CFO and CIO when I'm with them one-on-one than in the boardroom when we're talking about why sales are weak.
Got it. Great. Hey, I'm going to jump in. There's a question from one of the attendees, and this is for Melissa. You said that at your first job, many did not understand IMC. And the person asking the question, how has that changed and how have you seen the practice evolve and grow over your subsequent positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I'd love to hear Todd and Tariq answer this one too. I think that, as when we think about IMC and integrated marketing communications and how people define that, I think there's probably still a lot of dispersity in how people are defining that. But I think that the skills that you develop in IMC, the methodology, bringing technology and data to things, that's the evolution that's really happened. And I think at this point, if you don't have this data mindset, if you're not thinking that way, you're sort of on the outside now. I think so much of being in class with Don Schultz and him talking about the death of the brand manager and the new way of thinking, and it feels like, especially over the past 5, maybe 10 years, you're really seeing that people really value this way of thinking more, and it's been really interesting to me. I think if I look at my own career, and even probably 5 years ago, if you had asked me, where will you be in 5 years? I would have told you, I either want to own my own company. I love building things, as I said, or I would like to be the CMO of an e-commerce or like that type of business, because that's really where I've seen where I can show the most impact on a business. And what's most fascinating to me right now is not that my title is CMO, but that my first CMO role is in, one of the biggest companies in the country. that is a very traditional company who really values taking a data mindset and a performance mindset to marketing. I think that's what's been so amazing to me, and I think is really a testament to like this thinking really being the way of the world now.
Yeah, Melissa, many would argue that Cadillac is a tech company. And that's making great cars, but it's a tech company in its core right now.
Yeah, I think definitely when you look at automotive, we are definitely a tech company and really tech and innovation. But it is really nice to come back to an industry I was in years ago and to have it be so focused on this way of thinking, which I think is newer even in automotive now.
Okay, Todd, you want to take a part of this question? I mean, any part of this question?
Sure. Just building on what Melissa said, I think that, maybe we did ourselves a disservice, those of us in marketing communications early on, because too much of it was focused on the brand must look the same, right? And it wasn't enough on putting the customer at the center, putting data at the center, and doing, of course, I'm biased, but I like to think that our education gave us the bent toward performance-based marketing because it was customer-centered, not segmentation-centered, et cetera. And number two, because we understood what a database could do. And all that's evolved since then are just the abilities for us to utilize that data. I mean, it's gone up thousandfold. And so I think what started out as a logo police, as some people like to call it back in the old days, right, has evolved into something now that I really believe a lot of other programs in education for marketing are not capturing, and that's customer-centric, data-driven.
Great, thank you. And Tariq, anything you
Yeah, look, I think that I have a slightly different bend on part of it. I agree with a lot of what's being said here. I think there's a couple things. One I would say is the industry is finally caught up to be able to execute with IMC. This is what Melissa was hitting on earlier. But I'm using my IMC, frankly. There are times I looked over my shoulder and go, oh, at last, I finally get to do this. Because the tools and the access to the data and the speed to be able to do it is actually here finally. Having said that, I actually think, and I even think if Dr. Schultz was still here, he'd agree with this. I think the pendulum swung too far. And I think what we found out is when you lean into I don't let my team talk about performance marketing. We talk about brand performance. And if you look at what's going on in the industry right now, and you strip away some of maybe the social issues around it that are driving the big word around purpose, it's not just because of that. D2C businesses have learned this as well. The data will get you so far, but it'll also get you into a different kind of commodity race with other businesses. And if you don't establish a brand with a purpose, with a heartbeat, with a differentiation, the numbers will only get you so far. And so I think we're finally at a place where the collision of this is at a place where IMC folks are that much further ahead. And I'm going to go one more step, having been the back corner of Fisk Hall years ago from those other, we're the crazy kids in the corner from the journalism students. We're finally at a place where I believe the full totality of Medill is in a place where it can strike when you think about the role of commerce, content, social commerce, and the other elements of it. That corner is, in my mind, a collection that has the ability to really take on what the new world of marketing is, I dare say, than even potentially our friends across the way over at Kellogg. I firmly believe that.
I think many of us agree with that. So that's good. Thank you. So there's another question that I wanted to share. This is from a student, Jenny Hugh. What would be some words of advice for students unsure about pursuing IMC as a career? And the follow-up to that is, what resources can or should people access at Northwestern and beyond? And how can they determine whether or not this is the right career for them? So Tariq, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then I'm going to work backwards, Melissa and Todd.
So Jenny, I guess what my advice would be, and I promise I'm not being facetious when I say this, don't think of IMC as a career. I would tell you, think of it as a way to approach problems and a creative way to think about how to engage with customers. And I think there are a lot of different careers actually that can allow you to do that. I go back to, wishing someone to tap me on the shoulder a little bit earlier and help me understand where to intersect, where my passions intersected with what I wanted to go do. And I wish I had spent a little more time doing that and not necessarily following sort of what was the in vogue industry at the time. the way of thinking IMC gives you, I think, is a gift that can take you into lots of different categories, and frankly, in innovation spaces, into marketing spaces, into communication spaces. I think you're on a great journey. Spend a little time discovering what makes you happy, what you're good at, and then figure out where you can go apply these skills, because there's a lot of places you can.
Great. Melissa?
I think I'm just going to have a cut and paste copy on what you just said, because that's absolutely true. I think, what's so interesting, there's two things. I think looking back, you're never going to guess what your career would be, no matter what you set out to be. And I will tell you that of all the jobs I had, the one that I thought was perfect on paper was absolutely the worst job that I had. And it was for a lot of the reasons you're saying. I thought it was going to be one thing, it turned into another. It didn't fit my purpose or passion in my life. And in fact, sometimes made me a little more uncomfortable in the way we were approaching things. And you have to stay in tune with that. And that's what, when I said before, you have to follow your passion. If you start to understand what is exciting you when you have a conversation, or when you read a job description or any of that, if your mind starts to go and you start to think about things, then you're tuning into something that is important to you in that moment. And you've got to stay in tune with that. The other thing that I wish that someone, and I think the world today is better at this, but what I didn't really understand is, we talk a lot about mentorship, and I didn't really understand that if I wanted to have a conversation with someone, I could probably reach out and do it. And I think I was too shy, or too feeling like I was going to be bothering people or whatever. And I think that a lot of times just having a conversation, and even doing something like this, you're just going to start to learn and understand what people's different paths are. And you've got to take the pressure off yourself, because it's going to happen however you get there.
That's great. Todd?
The alumni list. Reach out to as many alums as you can narrow it down to, based on what you're interested in pursuing. I totally agree with what Tariq and Melissa both were saying in terms of this degree, unlike some other graduate degrees, even in business, does not narrow you down to any one thing. We don't have a major, so to speak, right? In that sense, we can do everything from, yes, be in database management, to being on the far right side of the brain with ideation. There are companies I also think that I've come in contact with, being a client of theirs, that are very, very interesting, in my opinion, for folks entering their career now. Companies like IDEO, if you haven't heard of them or heard of their sector, those are really, really interesting ways for you to utilize your holistic thinking, including left and right side of your brain.
That's great. Thank you. And then there's one other question. This is, Tariq, for you specifically. You say that you enjoyed jumping into the pet business. And the question is, what were some of the things that surprised you? And what distinct marketing skills or tools, if any, have you employed that you haven't used in previous roles?
Oh, thanks for the question. A little known fact, I started as a consultant. I didn't plan on being CMO of Petco. I had a former boss. It was his first CEO role. He had a thought on how to take a company that was, I don't know, we were 6 or 7 quarters of consecutive loss. He picked it as his first CEO role, had an idea of how to potentially differentiate the business, and called me and said, "Can you help me? I've got this thought." And ironically, the thought was around a humanization aspect of the business, nutrition. So off I went to take a look at this. We were going to take about $100 million of our portfolio out in additives and preservative foods and start to differentiate ourselves around nutrition. And when I got there, I saw a couple of factors. I saw a company that had not, in a world of the apocalypse of retail, a company that also had services. We had 85% of all of our transaction taking place on a rewards card that we weren't using the data for. And we had a secret sauce when I went out into the field and met our partners, of folks who get up every day and who look to impact the lives of pets, frankly, would rather work with animals and would rather work with people, which is a very special thing. And I went back to him and I said, if I'm going to position this whole strategy, was getting about how this impacts the company. He said, "Great, can you take a run at that too?" Smart guy. He's known me for 20 years and knew how to suck me in. And I went back to him and I said, look, I think we have the ability to become a connected pet company, that we have data that can allow us to actually circle the pet and get to this health and wellness platform, which is you've seen in the last 6 months, we've repositioned the company around. And actually the way we beat these algorithm players who have merchandise is we actually get to a knowledge base to take care of the full pet. And if we can get that information and can create a different kind of trust value, we aren't a retail company anymore. We're a health and wellness tech company that provides parent hacks for pet care owners who are increasingly shown that whatever they're doing for themselves, they want to do for their pets, whether it's their food, whether it's insurance, and we had all those pieces. And we were private with a goal to potentially go public. And you just don't get those kind of things to line up in your career. Having said that, sounded really romantic what I just laid out. I had a marketing organization sitting in 6 different places in the organization. It was a channel function at best. The organization, from a retail perspective, didn't really understand what the investment levels should be, weren't measuring any of the results of investment. But boy, did it look like fun. And so, 3 years later, here we are. I couldn't be more proud of the team and where we've gotten to. We have a lot more to do, but it isn't very often you get a chance to turn a business around and actually switch categories doing it and go public all within that. So yeah, it was just one of those ones, great opportunity that lines up with all the things that we've been trained to do.
Great, thank you. Another question from a student. This is from Marianne. And Todd, I'm going to direct this to you. Certainly Melissa and Tariq, feel free to jump in where you believe appropriate. But would you have done something different in your career? And if yes, what would that have been?
I would have gotten into a direct to customer, whether it be business customer or consumer customer, business model, industry, sooner in my career. My packaged goods experience was fantastic. Of course, it's always marketing 101, brand positioning and the like. Yet for marketers to survive today, they have got to show ROI, whether that is brand measures, like Tariq was saying. At my last company, we had key purpose indicators instead of just regular KPIs. But you've also got to show what the bottom line is on sales and how you can attach your efforts to that as well. And I just personally believe that industries who know who their customers are, Tariq certainly knows who his customers are at Petco. So does Melissa, right? She can get the records of every owner, new or used, for a Cadillac. And those industries, along with the one I just worked in, financial services, we have a real advantage because I know who they are. I know what I did to try to make any moves of action with them, and I know how to measure it.
That's great. Tariq?
I gotta tell you, if you're being real serious about what I would have been, I probably would have gone into culinary arts or design. And I just didn't, that part of the thinking wasn't part of around what I did. I say that somewhat facetiously, but I think one of the things we need to bring back into our learning is how do you and ensure that this doesn't happen with the data-driven world, is we don't lose our creativity.
Great. Melissa?
What you just said, by the way, I think is one of the most important things. To me, you always have to bring insight and creativity in with data. And this is a total aside, then I'll get back to answer the question, but it's something that I think is so important that, Tariq was talking about performance marketing before. And I think it's just something to really, especially very early in your career, to understand. Without good insight and creativity, like if you think about because we all have experimentation mindsets, the way that you understand if your program is working, you hold out a control group and you treat one group with something. Now, if you don't treat that group with something that has good creative, like the creative is, the targeting's all the same. So it's the creative that's really going to make the impact. So sorry to go off on that tangent, but it's something I think that's so important because if you get too into the data side of things, you really forget that. Now, what would I change about my career? My answer is really honestly nothing. I have a personal mantra that is, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even when and especially if it's really hard. And I think that in those moments when we're making mistakes or doing things wrong, you've got to really be uncomfortable sometimes. You've got to understand and you've got to make your mistakes. So I think that everything happened for a reason. Now, if I really could go back and change a few things in my life, would I? Probably, but then I wouldn't end up in the same place. And I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now, doing whatever I'm doing. So there's my answer.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So I'm going to take two questions and sort of smush them together. Okay. And the questions are these, what are you doing, each one of you, to keep current, and better said, to continue to learn and grow, and be a leader, both in your organization as well as in the marketing community. And the smush part of this question is, this has got to acknowledge that there are important emerging skills that are needed for any marketing leader to succeed. So I'd love to hear what you're doing in these areas. And to be clear, you're all leaders in the marketing community. So it's just to stay in that level. So Melissa, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to flip it to Todd and close with Tariq on this one.
Great. So you can tell I was ready to answer. No, it's really interesting. And I talked about it before. I think there's a lot of different ways. So there's not one thing that I'd say you need to blah, blah, blah. I think there's always things that are emerging. And I'll take an example right now of something that nobody knows and we're all learning about. We're going into a cookieless world. And as people who have really counted on cookies for a lot of things, there's no answer yet. We're learning it. So, what am I doing to stay current with that? I have a lot of conversations with people who I think are really smart on the topic. I read a lot of articles. I have conversations in in more conference type forums or, thought leader forums about it. So I watch videos, there's all these different things. And when you start to understand the areas you don't understand, and I have a lot of examples that I could give you of things that didn't even exist, when I was in school, that's how I really approach it. I think it's very multifaceted in how you go about it. And things are constantly changing, and you have to remember your learning is never done. You get your degree, but you're constantly learning. And that's the way that you move forward. So there's a lot of different ways to go at it.
So before I flip this to Todd, this is not only for you, Melissa, but it's something that you said that I'd be curious about others addressing as well. When I hear the cookieless world is about to emerge and that's going to change the way that we're marketing, I clearly get that this is a reality in today's marketing. But great brands were built and sustained and continue to evolve before there were cookies ever invented, right? Except of course for Oreos. So I'm curious, without some of the technological advantages that cookies represent, are you confident that you're going to be able to continue to grow demand for Cadillac?
Yeah, and I think this is where what I believe happens in these moments is, and I'm excited to see what will happen, is this is where great innovation comes about. You have a bunch of really smart people, and honestly, you have a lot of money. And those two things together, and if you look at ad tech and martech along the way, that's what really drove innovation. So, will we still be able to grow great brands? To answer that, yeah, of course we will. I think what Tariq was saying before, we finally got to the point where we could do all the things we talked about in IMC. We hit this mecca point a couple of years ago. And then I do think, honestly, some things went a little too far and some things became a little too data oriented, and things that I had been proclaiming, I'm so excited we're finally here. I became uncomfortable with privacy and how things were, how do you make sure that you're responsible with people's data and you're working with partners who are, and all of that. And so what I think is going to happen, and this again is a little aside from what you're saying, but I think, this is where it's fascinating as we get into these points of innovation. I believe in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have this really revolution and epiphany of where people are going to understand the value of their data. I think there's two things coming together when we talk about the cookieless world and people's data. The other thing that I think is really coming is that people are going to understand the value of advertising in a way that they have never before. And I say that because how many subscriptions do you have for streaming? How many times are you asked to add another? Well, people like Hulu have already figured out you can start to understand the value of the exchange. Do you want to see ads? It's this much. And if not, it's this much. some places will not let you see an article unless you say, will you see ads? Here's how you undo your ad blocker. I think we're going to, in 3 years, be in a very different place where people understand the exchange, and it becomes a much more opted in, and I think a much better place where we can say, we're choosing to have relationships versus just having this like scattered ecosystem that honestly brought us to the Mecca and then brought us a little too far.
Great, thank you, Todd.
Well, it goes without saying, I really think while there's lots to learn inside your company and including in your own department, you absolutely have to commit. I have it on my calendar that once a week, I will spend an hour minimum reading and watching things from not only my marketing peers, but other folks in the industry in which I'm working. So with that said, I think the most important thing in this new cookieless world that you talked about is it's pretty straightforward. You got to be a customer magnet, not a cookie collector. And the way that you can be a customer magnet, I think, in today's world does start with your brand having both a purpose defined as well as values. If your company doesn't have one, marketing is a very natural place to be the champion for that. It's got to be innate, genuine, and believable, and you got to deliver on it in all areas, not just customer facing. I think that will lead us toward where people, to Melissa's point, are opting in naturally, so we don't have to ask for permission to send them things. And frankly, the people that don't want you're wasting your time. So you might as well focus on the people that want to hear from you, want a relationship with you.
Fantastic, thank you. Tariq?
So I'll hit a couple things, but I want to pick up on something that Melissa said, because I think it's spot on. I couldn't be more excited about cookieless, honestly, for exactly the reason Melissa said. I think it is the biggest innovation driver we're going to see, number one. Number two, it removes the excuse of the data made me do it. And number three, it forces you as a marketer and as a company to think about how the heck you're driving value for the customer, period. Our model will not work, even with cookies going forward, to become that trusted pet parent if we don't create sign-in value. If you don't not only opt in, you actively make a decision that this brand is bringing value to you, you won't be successful. And cookies won't solve that for you in the future either, even if they stuck around. So I'm thrilled about it. To answer your question, the things that I do, lots of roundtables. I will tell you, COVID accelerated the number of folks that I get to see on roundtables. Melissa and I have caught up on a number of different ones. It's invaluable. The connectivity to other marketers, hearing, listening, reviving, giving you energy, realizing you're not the only one. Like, it's been spectacular. But outside of that, I make a point of also breaking my marketing, my echo chamber as well, right? Because we also bring a lot of our own things. So I'm a big believer of there's things away from what we do. Spend time in culture, travel, food, find your passions, but spend time looking outside, because the ones who break the opportunities and disrupt the businesses aren't learning it from inside the businesses. What do you do culturally, right? What are you doing to impact not only what you do every day as a business, but what do you do as a culture? Because that exposes you to your people in a different way. I'm a big believer in reverse mentorship. We apply it. Those that are natives to all this stuff, you're never going to be fully native, but spend a little time, you can learn a lot. So I'm a big believer in that. And then, look for disparate things that have nothing to do with your business, arts, culture, whatever that is, you'll find a link to make you better at what you do. And then the last thing I'd just say is what Melissa said, never stop learning, first about yourself and about the industry.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so we have another question from one of the students. This is from Francisco, and this is for all of you. The question is, which brand do you identify with and admire for their IMC strategy? And you cannot mention the company for whom you work today. And then the follow-up question to that is, which sector or industry urgently needs to catch up on IMC and offers great disruption opportunity? So Todd, you start.
Sure. Maybe sound obvious, but I can dig into why. Whole Foods. So I would say Trader Joe's and Whole Foods are almost neck and neck. However, John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, also founded an organization called Conscious Capitalism. If you have not read up on that topic, it is, I think, not only very timely, but also consistent with everything we're seeing going on with society, as well as, the desire for a brand purpose. The industry, ironically, that is the marketing leader, the granddaddy of all marketers, is the one that better figures stuff out soon, and that's packaged goods. They're still used to buying end-of-aisle displays, SKUs, putting it in a mega roll 12-pack versus a 48 roll at Costco. They don't know anything about me, and when they want me to engage with them, it's join us online at facebook.com. For what reason? Why would I want to join Pampers, even if I had 10 children? And yet the irony is they have so much data for a company that does not sell direct to their customers.
All right, Tariq.
I guess for me, I'd say Starbucks and probably Peloton would be two that I'd go to. Barring sort of the black-eyed Pelotons dealing with their own public image, but we'll see how they manage for that. I think it was actually we're going to see how they do, but I think the way they use data, I think Starbucks in particular, when you look at the rest of the QSR industry, has done that in a way that, and a little luck, by the way. We talk a lot about Starbucks, and we forget that Starbucks activated an in-app wallet model before, Apple did their wallet, and I think it would be fascinating to see how successful Starbucks would have been if it had happened after. There are just certain things that happen prior to technology that can also end up being an incredible insulated advantage. But I think the way they work their loyalty models and the way they understand their customers is one for sure. I think what Peloton does to understand their members and how they move, how they've extended not only their product, but their innovation within that system. But I think the model is what I admire, right? In terms of how they approach it. So you could probably find a few others as well. In terms of industry, I actually think QSR is going to be a really fantastic place to try and figure out personalization and customization going forward. And I think there's tremendous opportunity using AI and using other forms of technology to not make that as cumbersome as certainly as franchisees might feel it could become. But I think somebody who figures that out, there's some potentially really spectacular changes to that industry. I think that could you come out of that world, Neil, you can just imagine what you could start to do.
No, I'm seeing it right now, and just for everybody's benefit, QSR is quick service restaurant. Not everybody.
Yeah, I apologize. I made that marketer mistake of throwing. There you go, an acronym go.
No, it's a politically correct thing to say.
So good stuff. Thank you. And Melissa.
So I'm going to go in one industry and say how they're applying it differently. And Tariq actually talked about it. So I'm a big fitness person. I love to work out, and the pandemic has really changed, because I was a big gym person, has changed the way I do things. And I work out with both Peloton and SoulCycle/Equinox, and Peloton really does it well. And they're much better at it. And SoulCycle, which SoulCycle changed my life, helped me understand a lot about myself over a long time. And I literally beg them to understand me better. And they just haven't, they haven't quite gotten to understanding what are the right things to suggest to me, ever recognizing me for the fact that I'm actually a big advocate, and I will talk about and pontificate about how great I think SoulCycle is for people to engage in. And there's they just haven't quite gotten the recognition or the, how to have their experience stand up. So one industry, two different examples.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have one two-part question for you, for each one of you. And it starts with this. What is the single biggest and most significant professional highlight of your career to date? And if you had to look out over the next 5 years, how do you think that you'll answer that question differently than the first part? So I'm going to start. Actually this time with Melissa, and then go to Todd, and then Tariq.
This is a really, really hard one.
Thank you.
think one of the things I'll say is, for me, one of the biggest accomplishments is being a CMO. Like I said, not of an e-commerce company, and not of something more like that. So that's one of them. I think within that, two moments of things that I worked on that I really loved was at Motorola. We when we were relaunching e-commerce, because Motorola is a B2B to C business, And so my job fundamentally changed at the time when we really started to think about, if we were going to try to build more direct relationships, what would that look like? And it was a really exciting time, I think, in the industry. It was around 2010, and it was before CDPs. It was before really like any of those technologies. It was when programmatic advertising was just coming out. And we really built out a tech stack to be able to target and measure and tie together attribution before multi-touch attribution was really a thing. And figuring out how to do all of that really turned my brain on in a really good way, because again, it was when a lot of the technology was changing and I had to learn a lot. And so being able to do that, which really drove me to be, someone who was seen as a thought leader in programmatic and MarTech and ad tech and all these things. And it was this just burst of energy from that. I think that's one of my most proud moments, because I really, learning from a lot of people, taught myself. I didn't really, you can't really teach yourself that stuff, but that was one. And then I think, another one that I love that I just worked on was the Escalade launch. And it's because we really did it as a non-traditional launch. We showed up in a lot of different ways. We did a lot of really interesting things, and in the end, beat every KPI that we had, and had huge growth in not only sales and looking at the impact of some of the things we did, but overall brand opinion grew at a record rate with things that we did in that launch. And I think being able to pull together all the different things that I know and all the different skills I have to bring a very, kind of alternative launch to market and see really good results is something that I was really proud of. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, Neil, you're still on
Threw that to you on mute, Todd.
Todd.
Okay. When I was Chief Marketing Officer for Sonic Drive-In, which for many of you only know maybe from the advertising, the two guys in the car, we had just launched that campaign. We were expanding from a super regional brand to a national brand. Sales were killing it. And I think it's really a result of my IMC education and combining creativity with data that got us on a path as a group that I'm happy to say marketing led, but certainly was not the only contributor to taking advantage of the core fundamental difference of that brand, which, apologies to McDonald's, Neil, is that we cook everything to order and we will customize anything. Literally, if you say I want chocolate sauce on a burger and you're willing to pay the upcharge of 25 cents, no problem. And this is what Sonic is known for, especially with drinks. But we had never really played upon that. And so we launched things like, we had counted up the number of unique flavors that we had in our drinks and how many unique combinations were, 168,894. We did this whole promotion around it. But that's not the big point. It set us, that kind of thinking set us on a path of how do we take advantage of this personalization aspect that we have. You're in your car, it's an isolated environment, you're in control, you can order any combo of anything you want. It's all on cook to order. But if you've ever been to a Sonic, like every restaurant, there's this static backlit menu, just like a McDonald's. However, Sonic, unlike McDonald's, had the opportunity to have you as a customer, or worst case as a carload, in isolation. So we could actually develop, using data about you, a personalized menu. And the brand's not quite there yet. The technology cost is not quite, well, you got the franchisee factor. They don't want to pay for that. But if you go to a Sonic now, what it will do is it will suggest a sell to you based on time of day and your past purchases. Where it's going, hopefully sooner than later, is that whole screen is personalized to you. And what do we all want to do when we're getting breakfast? We get the same thing every day, and we want to get in and out of there as soon as possible. So when you go to a Sonic in the future, it'll say, welcome back, Todd. Do you want a breakfast burrito and a Diet Coke? And you just hit the button. Yes, it's got your credit card. Boom. You're in and out of there. And so I'm just really excited about continuing to see the evolution of what we started.
Okay, so I know you said a lot and it was really important stuff, but what I heard was chocolate on a hamburger, and I've got to go try that.
I'm telling you, yeah, I mean, people do this thing called a suicide burger, where they literally will do, like, these like jalapenos with strawberry sauce. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, let me start with chocolate. I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
All right, Tariq, what about you? Most significant, important accomplishments so far in your career?
Well, the first one, I guess, isn't his direct line to the business, was to actually have the fortitude to leave HP and go be the CMO of my 5-year-old daughter as she marshaled her way through cancer, to be honest, and know that I had comfort in making the decision. And ironically, I used a lot of IMC skills during that journey too. Head of household, family comms, etc. But no,
let's be clear now. Carla was the CEO while you were doing this, right?
As is always the case.
Okay, just want to make sure.
But we focusing on that in a critical point in my career, and still knowing that you can come back and do what you need to go do. And it goes back to there was a critical moment. I was interesting. It took that significant moment for me to learn, what I was talking about earlier. Can you focus on what matters, right? And then I would say, real life business one, and we're not done, so I'm not going to claim it a complete victory. But I joined a company. We were significant quarters of decline. We just closed our 10th quarter of growth with the largest retail IPO in history in January. But more than that, when I look at what we're becoming and actually the creation of a different category, it's just what a blast and what a great opportunity. But I don't think I'd say it's my biggest victory, because we're not there yet. But it's been a hell of a lot of fun getting there.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that Melissa, Todd, and Tariq all referenced initiatives that drove growth, drove success, which is exactly why they're in the positions that they are. And my guess is, if you had to look out well into the future, though you don't know exactly what it is yet, there's going to be something that will be even bigger than what you've accomplished so far, and that's going to replace some of the things that you've already highlighted. So great stuff, just great stuff.
The one thing, if I could just add one quick thing here.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that marketers in the past set out to not worry about growth. I just think we have the access to signals now and measurement tools to do a lot of the things that, frankly, even as far back when I was in the program, were telling us to try and do. And the data signals are now in a place where that connectivity, what Todd referenced about CPG, the biggest challenge is they put themselves into a walled garden, closed loop channel where they don't get access to the data. It's not that the data is not there. It's Target and Walmart aren't giving it to them, right? So, I think it's important to recognize the whether it was a marketing mix analysis or variations of measurement, those have been around since we were in the business. That it's just the quality of the data, the signals, and the frequency has gotten much better. And so I think it tip a hat to those who in some ways did it before all this. In some ways, a heck of a lot harder than those of us today, to be honest. I'm glad I got to bridge both worlds.
Got it. All right, marvelous. Well, listen, we are near the end of our time. I wanted to ask the attendees if there's any other questions, raise a hand or add it to the Q&A. We can wait a moment for that. So certainly, as we're doing that, though, in the event that some show up, I just wanted to say, Melissa, Todd, and Tariq, not only on behalf of Northwestern, do we all thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us, but just the way that you've gone about not only growing your career, but enjoying success in your current roles is extraordinary. And it's something that I'm certain every attendee on this call has been able to take away multiple insights about things that they could apply in their own experience. So that's fantastic. And thank you for that. So since I asked the question, if there's any other questions or comments, there are none at this point. So I think it's fair to say we can wrap this up, maybe just a couple minutes ahead of schedule. But to Melissa, to Todd, to Tariq, thank you. To Vijay, thank you for your confidence in letting us pull this off and put this together. And Stacy and Matt, for all your support technically, couldn't do it without you. So with that, I hope everybody has a fantastic end to your Tuesday evening or to your Wednesday, as the case might be, and look forward to staying connected. Thanks again, everybody. All the best to you.